Hello, you guys. We are in Aaron's game, and currently he's playing. I think it's gonna roll over like 30 minutes, I think, since the thing started. But I mean, I think let's do it right here. Let's do this one, and then zoom out a little bit. There we go. All right, guys, enjoy the show. China? Yeah, mate. Hell yeah!
Many of the fans
Go, 4-3, baby, come on!
Alright, Hassan, relax. Oh, here we go, Kev. Calma.
I don't want to shower.
How did superheroes go from this to this?
Max, bro, you gotta.
Online fame is like a tightrope walk. With a delicate balance to strike, a certain level of controversy can actually since it keeps your name in the headlines and drives up the deal.
In the history of modern cults,
August 31st, 19.
many of the facts you learned in history class were directly related. The first was presidential election.
I'm Mr. Beats. See,
This is a map showing the percentage of heaven. Here we are, and which Republican candidate?
Steps! Get on the ball, touch the ball.
Smallpox. For thousands of years it ravaged civilization, raging unchecked across the globe, wiping out entire civilizations. And yet, you will never get it. Why? It's largely thanks to Dr. Edward Jenner, who figured out how to cure smallpox. With tabs. All before the invention of blood. This is the incredible true story of how one man saved the human.
This one. Weightlifting. And the Lucas in England.
Hi, dudes.
And the Lucas. July 20th.
Get me something quick to watch.
Below the poverty line. So, this
Picture this. It's 2016 and Kylie Jenner has just dropped her highly anticipated.
in a few seconds. Jenner is notoriously
Oh my god, I genuinely just want to watch that. Okay, I watch.
fun time. Kid
Australian authorities have reportedly announced they're investigating pop star Katy Perry regarding a sexual assault.
Before we begin, if you want to learn more about geishas, I've got an Audible link pinned in the comment.
What?
Mewing.
What? Look at this guy on the podcast.
Mewing. How does it belong? Let's talk about this new film because it is over. In February 2026,
Okay.
create
For decades, Israel and the United States have engaged a wild mission. There's any snitches in the group.
Katy Perry has recently
Wait a minute, what?
Katy Perry has recently been accused of
October. I want to show you this map of
Wow.
54.
How nice is this? Oh my god. I was gonna think
Hi,
something
Jeff.
else.
Yes, yo, 2-2, let's go.
Maybe still $50 for premium lines. But if you haven't made the switch yet, here are 50. A month prior to takeoff. It's been less than a year since the U.S. put a man on the moon, and astronaut Neil Armstrong said those words. That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. The U.S. wants to do it again, and perhaps have an astronaut say, this is another small step for man, although admittedly it won't be the same kind of leap for mankind. That shows how little interest the U.S. public is paying to the Apollo 13 mission. When Apollo 11 took off on July 16, 1969, the entire world was watching. Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins would become household names for many years to come. The images of them walking on the moon would forever be implanted into people's minds. And when Armstrong said the Eagle has landed, people all over the globe were half-baked on beer at their house parties, celebrating as if they had just won the lottery. Things were not exactly the same when the Apollo 13 mission was announced. If you had picked up a newspaper in 1970, you'd have had to turn a fair few pages to read about the mission. It seemed that the hard-to-please public was not that impressed with spaceflight anymore, and you can bet that not many people knew the names of the astronauts James A. Lovell Jr., John L. Swigert Jr., and Fred W. Hayes Jr. But while the U.S. public is less interested in these guys, at this point in time, their mission is about to break new ground. People will flock together in their living rooms again, but there won't be much of a party atmosphere this time. That's because something terrible was about to happen. It has to be said, though, that the mission's horrific nature will make people interested in spaceflight again. Hour zero. As the crew's ready for takeoff, the families and relatives of all three men are excited but nervous. The astronaut Jack Swigert shouldn't have even been there. He's just replaced another astronaut to the other guy coming down with rubella, aka the German measles. This is the first thing that has gone wrong. Swigert at least doesn't have a wife at home or any children to worry about. That can't be said for Fred Hayes, who, like Swigert, has never been to space before. Hayes' 9-year-old son, Stephen, doesn't quite understand the implications of what his daddy is doing, although his pregnant wife certainly is feeling the pressure. In a few days from now, she's going to be rubbing that bump on her stomach, wondering if, in years to come, she's going to have to explain to this child why she never talked her husband out of going on that mission. After all, she is well aware of the dangers involved in sending humans to space. What she doesn't know is that they are traveling in what is essentially a bomb. As for the commander of the mission, Jim Lovell, you could say he has more to lose than everyone. He has 4 kids with his high school sweetheart, Marilyn. Their daughter, Barbara, is 17, and she understands the gravity of the situation, pun intended. Their son, James, is 15, Susan is 12, and Jeffrey is just 4. The entire family will soon hear that their beloved husband and father might freeze to death or die slowly as his oxygen runs out. It's going to be a hellish few days for all of them. Everyone except the 4-year-old knows what happened in February 1967 when Apollo 1, supposed to be the first spacecraft flown into space with the intention of landing on the moon, didn't quite get there. All 3 men were incinerated in the cabin during a launch rehearsal. With spaceflight, there are literally a million things that can go wrong, perhaps no more devastatingly exemplified than in the 1986 space disaster, when 7 U.S. astronauts died just 73 seconds after takeoff. In short, the families of these 3 men in Apollo 13 are proud as hell, but right now, their nerves are as frayed as Charles Manson. The Saturn V rocket they're sitting in at the Kennedy Space Center is about to take off. Mission Control does the countdown. 10, 9, 8. Ignition sequence has started. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. And we have liftoff. The time is 2:13 Eastern. Destination, the moon, or more specifically, the Fra Mauro crater area. 200,000 people who've come to watch the watching the event on television where Mission Control say the Saturn V, building up to 7.6 million pounds of thrust, has cleared the tower. Another voice says, "This is Mission Control Houston. We appear to have a good first stage at this point. People are told the trajectory is looking just fine as the rocket powers on. Mission Control lets them know that 1.2 miles into the sky, the spacecraft is traveling at 1,500 feet per second. At home, the men's families jump for joy, but they don't know that something isn't quite right. At about 5.5 minutes, the center engine of the S2 stage shuts down. This isn't good at all. It shut down 2 minutes early. It means that the remaining 4 engines have to burn 34 seconds longer than it was planned, and that the S4B third stage engine has to burn 9 seconds longer. That all has to happen for Apollo 13 to get into orbit. Mission Control isn't happy, but everyone knows that there will always be something that doesn't go exactly to plan. They're just hoping that this little glitch will be the worst thing that happens on the mission. It's not by a long shot, but the next few hours and the hours after are all smooth sailing for the crew and ground control. Hour 30. The 3 astronauts are fooling around, talking about their appearance while doing a bit of facial grooming. Jack Swigert makes a joke, saying something along the lines of, "Hello to all the girls." The mood is good among the men. They're told some golf scores, and then Jack goes into detail about how they get rid of their pee at the spacecraft. The transmission between the guys is what's called the Capcom, or the capsule communication. The astronauts on Earth keep in touch with the crew all the time. They take the Capcom job in shifts. Hour 46. Nothing major is happening right now. At some point, a guy named Joe Kerwin, who's the main capsule communicator at this point, reports the spacecraft is in real good shape as far as we are concerned. We're bored to tears down here. Just after he says that, the master alarm sounds and scares the hell out of everyone. It's a false alarm, though. The guys then listen to a song as Kerwin winds them up by sarcastically telling them space looks great and that they have all the comforts of home. He's well aware that space travel is extremely uncomfortable. Hour 47. The crew talks about a problem with the hydrogen tank, after which they discuss changing their flight plan. There's also a problem with the command module, but it's nothing to write home about. The mission's still going according to plan. Hour 52. The new Capcom guy, Vance Brand, jokes with the crew. Everything looks normal, so they can afford to kid around. Right now, they're traveling at 2,323.4 miles per hour. They're about 170,000 miles from where they took off. Hour 55. Things are so under control that the crew starts a live TV broadcast for the folks back on Earth. As interesting as this should be, quite a lot of TV stations are not even showing it. It's as if people just aren't interested in space anymore. Hayes tells the people at home how they sleep, how they drink water. These guys tease each other, as they always seem to, and then they put on the song Willow Weed for me. They're making space travel look like a walk in the park, albeit something you wouldn't want to do if you were claustrophobic. At 55 hours and 45 minutes, Hayes goes up behind Lovell with a repressed mouth scaring the hell out of him. Lovell tells the new Capcom, "Every time he does that, my heart jumps into my mouth." It's at this point that the TV transmission ends. Lovell is the one who signs off, telling people back home, "This is the crew of the Apollo 13, wishing everybody there a nice evening, and we're just about ready to close out our inspection of Aquarius and get back for a pleasant evening in Odyssey." Good night. Aquarius is the lunar module, and Odyssey is the command module. We'll talk more about this soon. The people down on Earth have just witnessed what looks like a bunch of very small teenage kids pranking and teasing each other all the time. It seems to them that space travel isn't frightening at all. Hour 56. The crew has just heard an explosion. It sounded like someone hitting a large piece of metal, followed by a crinkling sound, like someone squashing a rather large can of Coke. This is when Swigert says, "Okay, Houston, we've had a problem." They look at the oxygen tanks and fuel cells. What they see is a lie. Oxygen tank 2 has little to nothing in it, and oxygen tank 1 looks like it's about to run out. Mission Control responds by saying this is likely not what's happening. They say the gauge readings might be faulty. Lovell explains that he's pretty sure he can see gas leaking out of the hatch. It's not quite panic station time yet, but something is wrong. And it doesn't seem to be a minor something like the earlier issues. This is serious. Lovell says venting something in space, it's a gas of some sort. What they don't know just yet is that there's been a short circuit in oxygen tank 2, which basically ignited a bomb. It exploded despite what's called the stir, which stirs the contents of the tank. And this caused a 13-foot panel to blow off the service module. The two main parts of the Apollo spacecraft are the command module and the service module. The command module is where the cabin is and where the crew lives. It's where much of the equipment is and where many controls and displays are. This is a cone shape. The service module is where they store lots of equipment, but it's also where they get propulsion from and electrical power. It's shaped like a cylinder. They're both connected by a kind of umbilical cord. As for what's gone wrong, it'll become known that there was a design error. You see, the command and service modules were supposed to operate at 28 volts, but years before these guys took off, when tests were happening at the Kennedy Space Center, it was decided that 65 volts would be better, so engineers were told to redesign the components to run at both levels of voltage. So far so good, but the problem was the oxygen tanks. These are not only for the men to breathe, but to also help run the fuel cells that give power to all the spacecraft's systems. So in short, there's a thermostat in those oxygen tanks to ensure that the temperature inside them is regulated. The company that made the thermostats had not gotten the memo about the new voltage change. This might not have been such a big issue if it weren't for the fact that during the design stage of the tank, someone had dropped tank number 2. But as it didn't seem damaged and did fine during further tests, it ended up going to space with the other tanks. Nonetheless, after it had been put inside Apollo 13, it wouldn't empty during some other tests. It's because when it had been dropped, the instrument that did the emptying had been damaged. Technicians managed to find a way to make things right, but by doing so, they heated up the tank so much that some of the insulated wires were damaged. If that makes a little sense to you, don't worry, you can't all be rocket scientists. All you really need to know is that Apollo 13 left Earth with an unstable tank inside it, making it a flying bomb. Once Ryder was ordered by Mission Control to stir the contents of the tanks by hitting the stir button, what he or no one else could have known was that the previously damaged insulation wiring caused a spark. We don't need to tell you that a spark inside an oxygen tank is generally not a good thing. The oxygen fed the fire, and the pressure became so much that the tank exploded, wrecking not just it, but many of the things inside the service module. The 3 astronauts were now 200,000 miles from home in a spacecraft that was missing some of its vital parts. Hour 57. The Capcom, now Jack Losman, tells the crew that the oxygen tank is leaking badly. He tells them it's slowly going to zero, and we're starting to think about the LM lifeboat. Swigert replies, that's what we've been thinking about too. Okay, we should explain something else. The LM means lunar module. This is the part of the spacecraft that is supposed to ferry the astronauts to the moon. It's connected to the command and service modules. It was the part of Apollo 11 that you saw sitting on the moon, or landed in a movie production studio for some of you wild-eyed people. In this case, the astronauts are thinking they could use it as a kind of lifeboat. It's never been done before, but hey, without electricity, they'll either freeze to death up there, or without oxygen, they'll slowly move toward that thing we call Granddad. The mission is important. It's now time to think about getting home. But with so little power, they have to power down the command module. It'll get very cold in here very soon. Even though escaping in a lifeboat doesn't sound so safe, the astronauts seem to be taking it all in stride. They later say they weren't thinking about death, but just getting the job done. Much more is about to go wrong, though. Hour 58. Lovell jokingly tells Mission Control that he wasn't expecting to return to Earth so soon. No one knows. His wife is now at home, worried out of her mind. She's been informed about the problems, and she knows he and the others have to make an emergency return. It's fortunate for the men that the explosion didn't happen on the way back home, because then there wouldn't have been a lunar module to use. They all would have died without a doubt. But even now, things are looking grim. No one has ever tried anything like this before. Hour 59. The crew makes their way to the lunar module. Given that they now only have 15 minutes to get out of the command module, the power is almost gone, and no power means death. Hayes and Lovell float from the tunnel to the lunar module, while Swigert stays behind to ensure everything is turned off. There are a few things they have to bear in mind. The lunar module is only supposed to have a 45-hour lifetime, but they need at least 90 hours. They should have enough oxygen, and even if the tank runs out, there are 2 backpacks full of oxygen that were supposed to be used for walking on the moon. There are also backup packs of oxygen for those packs. Food is a concern, or lack thereof, but water and temperature are a much bigger concern. They don't have much of either. Still, if they don't power it down, they won't have the power to get back to Earth. That's why all non-critical functions are turned off. Hour 61. It seems the men are in good spirits. Laswell, who's still Capcom, teases Lovell, telling him not to worry, this is all just a training exercise. Hour 67. The men are informed that President Nixon has been told about what's going on. Mission Control is currently in talks with the White House. When Nixon is asked if he'll listen to updates, he responds with, yeah, go ahead and throw it to me. Hour 68. Press conferences are held, and the general public now knows there's been an explosion, and the astronauts have no choice but to come back. It's about this time that Lovell is heard saying there probably won't be a lunar mission for a long time. Another major problem is the course they're going to take. They were supposed to land on the moon and then go home. Going straight back was never on anyone's mind. The command module navigational platform has been transferred to the lunar module, but that doesn't mean they can easily verify where they are. They believe that the surface propulsion system on the command module that could have them thrust back is now broken, so they decide to go around the moon and come back that way rather than just thrust back. They're literally going to swing around the moon. Space isn't the kind of place you can just do a U-turn, so this is the better option. They have the lunar module's descent propulsion system, but the crew and ground control now have to make a lot of difficult calculations. It's fortunate that before Lovell left the command module, he copied down all the important information from the module's guidance system. They will need to do another burn once they're around the moon. If they aren't able to do this, for some reason, they'll go on a different trajectory and miss the Earth by thousands of miles. Also, when they do that flight around the moon, they'll have no contact with the people on Earth. The good news is, during this quiet time, they look out the windows at awe, snapping pictures like space tourists. Hour 79. It's now or never. NASA has chosen a 4-minute burn, which will shave 12 hours off the flight and hopefully land them in the Pacific Ocean. Hour 80. Lovell's family is at home, now joined by the astronauts Pete Conrad, Buzz Aldrin, and Neil Armstrong. Hour 81. Lovell talks about food and water again. The crew decides that their best chance of surviving is if they consume 1/5 of their normal intake. They'll eat hot dogs and a half. They know they'll become severely dehydrated, but there's nothing they can do about that. They can only drink just 0.2 liters of water a day if they want to make it back home alive. The entire crew weighs a total of 31.5 pounds on this return trip. Ace even develops a urinary tract infection. And they've already decided not to drink their pee or even throw it out into space. They put it in bags, believing that they could upset their trajectory if they throw it out. Hour 82. The men are freezing. It's now 48 degrees Fahrenheit. It's dark and they're hungry and thirsty. They think about putting on their spacesuits, but that'll make it too hot. So they just use anything they can find to cover themselves. They also slip on their lunar boots, which at least warms up their feet. Hour 85. During a press conference, NASA explains that it's worried about what its symbols are left and says the rest of the journey is not going to be comfortable at all. Hour 90. Perhaps to cheer the guys up, the new Capcom asks Swigert about the new income tax rule when you're out of the country for a certain amount of time. It's just a joke, it helps with the men's morale. Hour 93. The lunar module is only supposed to carry 2 people. What that means is the canisters inside that absorb gas in the air won't absorb enough of it. This could lead to a dangerous buildup of carbon dioxide. It doesn't help that the command module uses square canisters, but the lunar module used round canisters, so they can't take the canisters from the command module and put them in the lunar module. This is a matter of life or death. They put their heads together, and with the help of ground control, they build new canisters out of plastic bags, cardboard, and bits from the lunar seat, as well as a bunch of tape. It works. The CO2 levels go right down. Hour 118. Lovell asked about the re-entry procedure. The reply is, Roger that. We're trying to get the procedures to you right now. It'll be a few hours before they get the timeline and the sequence of events that are going to happen. Lovell waits a minute and explains that he's not a happy man. He's just found some hot dogs, but they're so cold that they're frozen. What's important here is that when they try to power the command module back up for re-entry, it'll be a completely unique operation. There are no procedures for this since no one has ever thought such a thing would happen. It takes a lot of effort and a lot of brains to figure out how to proceed with the re-entry. Staff on the ground work through the maze running simulators to better understand how to perform the re-entry. As NASA says at a press conference, they've tried to run everything they've asked the crew to do through their simulators. Everything that is non-normal, says NASA. Back in space, the men have thrown away the rule book, so to speak. They've never powered down the command module in space, and they've never powered one back up either. They need to re-enter since the lunar module will burn up on re-entry as it doesn't have a heat shield. It also isn't built for landing in the ocean. Hour 123. Mission Control gives Lovell a green light to fully power up the lunar module. This will raise the cabin temperature and also restart the lunar module's guidance computers. Hour 125. Lovell says they now have no water left. That's not good, but he has to grit his teeth and listen to the re-entry checklist. Soon after, he tells the other 2 guys what's going to happen. Hour 132. Swigert now tells the new Capcom guy that it's too cold to get any sleep. He's very tired now and thirsty, but no one's complaining. He just hopes they'll get home. Hour 138. The damaged service module is jettisoned. This is when they see just how much damage was done during the explosion for the first time. All the men realize how lucky they are to be alive. Minutes later, Swigert thanks Mission Control. Many calculations had to be made in quick time to ensure the module left them, and they were able to thrust out of its way. It wasn't easy by any stretch. Hour 141. The lunar module is just about to be jettisoned. They've waited for this, knowing that if it's not literally blown off at the right time and at the right angle, they might hit the ocean and skip like a stone. A mistake here could also mean a very fiery entry, or as Lovell said years later, burning up like a meteor. Down below, the U.S. Navy is waiting to pick the guys up. Hour 142. The public is now glued to their TVs, not just in the U.S., but all over the world. This has been some trip, a drama-filled story. Talk about reinvigorating interest in spaceflight. It's actually a good day for NASA in terms of marketing. That is if the guys get back in one piece. The men land in the Pacific without any problems. The world cheers so hard that the thing nearly falls off its axis. Mission Control tells the guys, welcome home. What's more, even with a partly destroyed mothership, their splashdown becomes the second most accurate in the Apollo program. Hour 143. President Nixon, tricky dick to some, gets on the line to Lovell. He asks, are you on the line alone? Are the other fellows on too? Yes, sir, says Lovell. Nixon says, getting elected as president was the biggest day of my life, but this one was bigger. He tells them that they'll all get a Medal of Freedom. It's a good day for the astronauts and a good day for Nixon's image. Lovell apologizes for not completing the mission, but Nixon rightly reminds him that they did something even better. They did something that has never been done before. Even so, Lovell's more concerned about his family back home. That's what really matters. He figured that much out when he was hurtling through space. Now you need to educate yourself a bit more with 50 surprising facts about space you didn't know. Or have a look at this.
Managing multiple credit cards can feel like you have 50 extra mental tabs open. Switching apps, trying to remember which card owns what. Is it points, miles?
Think about this for a second. Being locked away for a crime you didn't commit, based on words they made you say. It sounds like something out of a dark movie, right? But it's a terrifying reality inside a justice. That convinced us it was perfect in the first place. I mean, you know the secret, right? There's this super brilliant scientist in a project that a single girl solves the entire case right before the incident. That, right there, is the CSI Act. It's this relief we've all absorbed from television, but forensic science is basically magic. It's instant, it's everywhere, and it is always right. You might think, so what, it's just TV, but it has a huge impact on the real world. Prosecutors will tell you that jurors walk into a courtroom expecting to see DNA evidence for everything. And if they don't get that high-tech proof they see on TV, they start to have
130,000.
July 20, 1970.
Wilbur, you don't actually understand the Big Bang Theory because before the Roman Empire, intrusive thoughts. This video includes a discussion. Hi, you live School shootings. According to the May 22nd, 2011. This is a very dangerous situation.
When you hear the name Christopher Nolan, what's the first thing that comes to mind? For many, the answer to that question would be Interstellar.
Released in 2014, Interstellar stars Matthew McConaughey as Joseph Cooper, a NASA pilot turned farmer from a volatile global family. After it's discovered that the situation on Earth is doomed, he has chosen to go on an interstellar expedition to find mankind's new home. But as anyone who has seen the movie will tell you, it's about so much more than that. Nolan cites Star Wars and 2001: A Space Odyssey as two films that had a great impact on him as a child and inspired his love of filmmaking. It's only natural then that he'd eventually take a crack at the space adventure genre himself. Upon release though, reviews for Interstellar were above average, but largely unremarkable. Notably, it only received a 73% in Rotten Tomatoes, the lowest score of Nolan's career up to that point, and the second lowest score he's received to this day. Now of course, Rotten Tomatoes reviews aren't exactly gospel, but they weren't alone in this opinion. While no one dared say it was a bad film, many reviewers couldn't look beyond what they saw as glaring flaws. Fast forward to 2025, and the consensus on Interstellar has shifted. It's now often considered one of the greatest science fiction movies ever made. On IMDb, it holds the 18th spot on the site's top 250 highest-rated movies. And when it was re-released in December 2024, it became the single most successful IMAX re-release ever. Why did this shift occur? How come critics didn't seem to fully understand the movie on release? And what effect did Interstellar have on Nolan's career and the sci-fi genre? Today we'll be finding the answers to those questions. And in the coming weeks, I'll be taking a look at each film in Christopher Nolan's stellar filmography. If that sounds interesting to you, feel free to subscribe. Now, without further ado, let's get into Christopher Nolan's masterpiece, Interstellar. The story behind Interstellar's production begins in 1980, when film producer Linda Obst and theoretical physicist Kip Thorne were set up on a blind date by their mutual friend, Carl Sagan. Though the two never did begin any sort of romantic relationship, they later collaborated on the 1997 film, Contact. Following this, the two wrote an 8-page treatment for a science fiction movie, which they presented to Paramount. And in June of 2006, development began on what would become Interstellar. The project had also attracted the attention of Steven Spielberg, who intended to direct it. Then, in March of 2007, Jonathan Nolan was brought on to write the screenplay. At this point, everything seemed to be looking good for this then-unnamed science fiction project. But in 2009, due to some contractual issues with Spielberg's production company, he parted ways with Paramount, which meant the project would have to find a new director. Fortunately, Jonathan Nolan knew a guy who was up to the task, and in 2013, it was officially announced that Christopher Nolan was working on a new science fiction film entitled Interstellar. Jonathan Nolan had spent the past 4 years writing a script, working closely with Kip Thorne along the way. And once Christopher Nolan was brought on, he selected among several of their ideas, merging them with the script he had been working on for a while on his own. Apparently, almost the whole first hour was left intact from Jonathan's script. Personally, this is one of my favorite parts of the narrative. One of the most interesting aspects of the opening of my first viewing were the interviews discussing what it was like to live on this post-apocalyptic Earth. It provides necessary exposition in a way that grabs the audience's attention, and with how perfectly these fit into the story, I never would have guessed that most of them were taken from an actual documentary. That documentary being The Dust Bowl, directed by Ken Burns. As the story goes, Christopher Nolan had watched the documentary for inspiration, and ended up contacting Ken Burns for permission to use the interview segments in Interstellar. And to tie all of it together, an interview was recorded in a similar style for the character of Murph. Through Murph's interview, we're introduced to our protagonist, Cooper, played by Matthew McConaughey, and it goes without saying that he did a phenomenal job here. Nolan has a way of casting actors that I never even would have considered for certain roles, and then they proceed to give a career-defining performance. It happened with Heath Ledger's Joker, and in my eyes, this performance is almost up there in terms of how unexpectedly fantastic it is. If you handed me the exact script for Interstellar, I'm not sure Matthew McConaughey would have come to mind at all, but it fits in perfectly. He has the rare ability to express incomprehensibly heartbreaking emotions one minute, then appear cool and confident the next. Both are equally as believable. I know people make jokes about his crying sometimes, but this exaggerated expression really captures the depth of his sadness in this moment. Like I said, it is an incomprehensible emotion because the scenario is next to impossible in our reality. And since this is the case, several actors in this cast will be required to express these complex emotions. Notable performances include Anne Hathaway's Amelia Brand, Jessica Chastain as Murph, and Matt Damon as Dr. Mann. Anne Hathaway has several tough scenes here, and for the most part, she does a great job in each. To be honest, I didn't love her character at first, but she definitely becomes better on repeat viewings. Her speech on the power of love didn't fully land on my first viewing, but as I came to appreciate her perspective more, it really fits the character for me. I only bring this up because I know her character gets some hate for all the mistakes she makes in this story, but I would recommend for anyone who disliked her to try to consider the events from her perspective, and especially by her philosophy. Under these circumstances, she proved to be a more tragic and significantly deeper character than I anticipated. Jessica Chastain also proves to be underrated in my opinion. She does a great job with many of her scenes, but the one that stuck out to me was her argument with Tom, played by Casey Affleck. Specifically when she screams about how her dad is trying to save her. That line delivery is gut-wrenching, and especially hurts the audience since we know that isn't true, as we're currently watching Cooper try his best not only to save them, but get back to them. And finally, for notable performances, is Matt Damon. On my initial viewing, I knew absolutely nothing about Interstellar other than what the title implies. So naturally, I was shocked during the Dr. Damon boxing sequence. And Damon ends up playing a role that's reminiscent of his character in The Departed. It really is unfortunate how good he is at playing the unlikable traitor, but definitely works here. Though he doesn't get much screen time, this sequence still ends up being one of the most memorable parts of Interstellar. in large part because of his performance, but also because of just how beautiful the setting is. And clearly someone in the marketing team agreed, as it's used for almost all of the film's promotional material. Nolan's usual cinematographer, Wally Pfister, unfortunately couldn't return for Interstellar as he was busy filming his directorial debut, Transcendence. He would later retire as a cinematographer, making The Dark Knight Rises the last time the two collaborated. He was replaced by Hoyt Van Hoyten, who does a fantastic job, and clearly Nolan liked him too, as he would continue working with him down to today, the two currently working on The Odyssey. And as is always notable with the Nolan production, the use of IMAX in Interstellar is incredible. The larger image really helps sell the vastness of space and these planets. I think I do still prefer The Dark Knight Rises use of IMAX overall, but that's not in any way a knock against Interstellar. Given the nature of the story, it would initially seem like Nolan would have to use more CGI than was typical for him. But that didn't end up being the case. Everything that could be done practically was done, whether that be through digital projection, puppeteering, or miniatures. A surprising amount of what we see in Interstellar is exactly what was captured by the camera. Personally, I don't mind the use of CG in film as much as some others, but I do agree that something is lost when the settings are completely CG. Notably, no green screens are used for Interstellar, and this helps not only the actors, but also the tangibility of the environment carries over to the viewers as well. Nathan Crowley returned as production designer in Interstellar, and his contributions cannot be overstated. The designs of the spaceships and their interiors are phenomenal. The quality of the miniatures is incredible. One particularly inspired design is the Endurance. It has 12 capsules, resembling a clock, which emphasizes the importance of time in this narrative. Also, over 500 acres of corn were actually planted for the scenes taking place at the farm. This likely could have easily been done with CGI, but again, that tangibility grounds the environment in reality, which is especially vital during that section of the story. Another notable aspect of the production design are the robots, Tars and Case. I'm not sure if this was intentional, but they almost seem to resemble the monolith in 2001: A Space Odyssey. Either way, they're great characters, especially Tars, and the effects on these were accomplished largely using puppetry, with VFX only being used for specific sequences, and also to remove Bill Irwin, who did the puppeteering along with providing the voice for Tars. That's not to say no CGI was used in Interstellar, though. In fact, it was used to great effects, even to a revolutionary degree, with the black hole scenes in particular apparently taking up to 800 terabytes of storage and aiding in scientific research due to their accuracy. And aside from just being accurate, they're also mesmerizing. While anyone would struggle to find any fault in the visuals for Interstellar, the same can't be said of the audio. Unfortunately, during specific sequences, it can be very difficult to hear the characters, let alone understand what they're saying. I found myself fiddling with the volume throughout almost the entirety of the film's runtime. And you can't just raise the volume either, because the action sequences are very loud, which is understandable. Nolan has stated that at times, the audience being unable to make out what the characters are saying was intentional, for instance during very loud moments. And this is fine, but this problem extends beyond those moments. One line that immediately comes to mind is when Cooper explains how his wife died. It's just way too quiet, especially given the fact that I can hear the other characters in this scene just fine. The dialogue is just a part of the auditory experience in Interstellar, though, with the other parts being absolutely flawless. And I'm specifically referring to the score. As is typical for Nolan, Hans Zimmer did the soundtrack, and I have no other words for it other than perfection. As much as I love Inception's score, Interstellar is the greatest work of Hans Zimmer's career, in my opinion, and the story of how it was put together is equally as fascinating. Instead of giving Zimmer any major plot details, Nolan simply gave him one page with some dialogue from the script. Specifically, the story seemed to focus on the relationship between a father and his son, and what Zimmer came up with became the foundation of Interstellar's soundtrack. Later into production, the pipe organ would be brought in, played by Roger Sayer. Nolan stated that he wanted the organ because it brought a measure of religiosity, which he felt represented mankind's portrayal of the metaphysical, which Interstellar does dive into with its final act. Also, the pipe organ comes with a very human limitation of requiring air to be played, yet still is capable of producing these grandiose sounds. In a sense, it breathes. Nolan felt this did a good job of capturing not just the space, but also the people in that space, which is really what the story's about. To quote him directly, he said, "There's an intimacy as well as massive scale." Though it probably wouldn't have been the first choice of many, the pipe organ proved to suit this story beautifully. Interstellar has by far my favorite soundtrack of any film I've ever seen, and personally, it really isn't up for debate. Within the context of the story, it's moving, but even on its own, I could never get tired of the score. I mentioned at the outset how the critical response to Interstellar was somewhat underwhelming, but commercially, it actually did really well. On a budget of $165 million, Interstellar grossed $681 million on release. Clearly, audiences seem to enjoy the movie. So what was it about Interstellar that critics seem to be mixed on? I've touched on the events of roughly the first hour of the film previously. Really, there's a lot more to be said about this portion of the story. As I mentioned, this section of the story was left almost entirely intact from Jonathan Nolan's original script, and this was definitely for the best. Most Nolan movies pride themselves on their relative realism. Despite movies like Batman Begins and Inception having many concepts that could be considered larger than life, they still remained mostly grounded in reality. And Interstellar is no different. Of course, there's the impressive scientific accuracy, which we'll get into momentarily, but a big part of grounding a story in reality is establishing proper stakes. The events of the first hour quite literally ground the film in a way that ensures the time-bending and especially metaphysical elements later on have a proper impact on the audience. For example, when our protagonist entered the wormhole, when Cooper first sees the giant wave on Miller's planet, these awe-inspiring spectacles are felt just as strongly by the audience as they are by the characters, in large part due to the excellent effects, production design, cinematography, and music, but also because the opening of the story establishes that these moments are in fact extraordinary. It's the exact opposite of a sci-fi story like Star Wars does, where Star Wars intentionally minimizes the importance of groundbreaking technologies so the viewer can become fully immersed in a unique and fantastical universe. Interstellar reminds the audience of reality, so they can fully relate to the reactions these characters have to the events taking place. We also are familiarized with what exactly Cooper is fighting for in this first act. This ensures that the emotional beats of the story hit as hard as they need to. I love everything about this opening act. It has been a cause of complaint for some, mostly because of its length. Some audience members seem to have been dissatisfied in a film titled Interstellar. The characters don't actually go to space until almost a third of the way into the movie. Personally, I find no issue with this. I'm glad the people levying these complaints aren't the ones writing movies. Realistically, could you shorten the opening? Yes, but Interstellar would become a much worse film overall. Another complaint Interstellar commonly receives is audience members believing it to be too confusing. Now, there is some pretty complex science at play here. However, at no point does the movie require the audience to understand something that isn't explained within the film itself. And for those who would like a deeper understanding of the science, much more than is necessary to understand the plot, Kip Thorne wrote a tie-in book entitled The Science of Interstellar. I will reiterate, though, this tie-in book is not necessary to get the basic plot. If you didn't understand Interstellar to a degree or it actively hindered your viewing experience, this book is not going to help you. For the sake of transparency, I just spent the past half hour writing an overly long tangent on how irritating this particular complaint is to me. But for the sake of time and relevance, I'll just leave it at this. I don't think there's anything wrong with not explaining every little detail in the story. I also don't think there's anything wrong with assuming that the audience has a basic knowledge of the concept within the story beforehand. That being said, Interstellar still doesn't do either of those things. It explains every small detail that is relevant to the plot, sometimes even bending over backwards for the sake of providing an explanation. For example, when Romilly explains how wormholes work to Cooper, who's quite literally a NASA pilot, he should already be more than familiar with the concept, but the scene is here only because the audience probably isn't. Interstellar does everything in its power to remain as accessible as possible, yet some still find cause for complaint because they couldn't be bothered with the science in a science fiction movie. To summarize this whole point, I don't think saying Interstellar is too confusing is a legitimate complaint. And just as an example of why this isn't a legitimate complaint, let's use one of the best sequences in the movie, Miller's Planet. And honestly, if I made a list of some of my favorite scenes in cinema history, this would probably be on it. There's lots of technical stuff at play here. Due to the planet's close proximity to a black hole, time passes faster there. It's stated that every hour on the planet is 70 years back on Earth. This is all the information the audience needs to understand the stakes, and is directly stated by Romilly's character. Once they arrive, look at that incredible line which revealed the mountains in the distance are actually waves. The shot where Cooper finally sees the wave is perfect. The pan-up really sells just how massive this wave is, and the music coming in just as the camera reaches the peak is incredible. The performances, the cinematography, the setting, the music, it all comes together to create one of the most memorable moments of the film, and in my opinion, cinematic history. And if the audience was curious as to why Miller's Planet had such large waves, the tie-in book explains how these were caused by its close proximity to the black hole. And that's all the book is meant to be. Supplemental information that enhances the audience's appreciation for the work put into grounding the story in reality. But the Miller's Planet sequence is just as easily understood and profoundly mesmerizing with just the context we receive within the film itself. The main reason this too confusing complaint bothers me so much, though, is because of just how much effort went into making sure Interstellar's narrative made sense from a scientific perspective. As was mentioned, theoretical physicist Kip Thorne not only was involved in the original 8-page draft that would become Interstellar, but he also was consulted on every aspect of the story that pertained to his field. Interstellar did something unique for a science fiction movie, in that it was attempting to be as scientifically accurate as possible. Kip Thorne had set up out two rules very early in development. First, nothing would violate established physics laws. And second, all the wild speculations would spring from science and not from the mind of a screenwriter. And this was done for the sake of preserving scientific accuracy. Yes, there are many elements in Interstellar that have not been proven. In fact, most of the plot relies on theory. But nothing within has been disproven either. Apparently, the element that was allowed the most artistic freedom were the frozen clouds on man's planet, which of course would not be possible naturally. The frozen clouds were probably not the thing that caused audiences to suspend their disbelief the most, though. That would definitely be the Tesseract sequence, which transforms the setting into the metaphysical. And to be completely honest, I struggled with this moment on my first viewing. Not because it's difficult to understand, but rather because I felt that it was a cop-out. The opening of Interstellar contained many unexplained happenings that I trusted would be expounded on later, and admittedly, I felt let down. That wasn't until I gave it a second chance a few months later. I realized that all ties into Amelia Brand's speech I mentioned earlier. After my first viewing, I didn't understand Interstellar at a fundamental level. I was so focused on the science that I failed to even attempt to comprehend what the story was actually trying to convey. When Christopher Nolan asked Hans Zimmer to begin working on the score of Interstellar, he didn't tell him about space travel or post-apocalyptic Earth. Instead, he simply asked him to write something to represent a relationship between a father and his son. Later on in the production, the dynamic was shifted to a father and his daughter, but the core of the idea remains unchanged. Interstellar isn't a story about saving the human race. It's about a relationship between a father and his daughter. It's about the power of love and the indomitable human spirit. Initially, my problem with the ending of Interstellar was that it felt random, but really that couldn't be further from the truth. I came to this conclusion because I was so preoccupied with what was happening, instead of considering why it was happening. And the movie foreshadows these events in the black hole several times before. The very first line Murph says is, "I thought you were a ghost." She literally tells us the plot twist in the opening moments, but it's such a faraway concept, it's almost impossible anyone to imagine. This is another benefit of the grounded opening. The ending becomes completely unpredictable, as we think we're familiar with what exactly is possible in this universe. Another thing I missed in my first viewing that made the ending feel random were the many parallels and references to 2001: A Space Odyssey. I mentioned Tars design earlier, but also the whole launch sequence swapping parallels to 2001. And considering all these references to 2001, I probably should expect the main character to be the god again. I don't think it's ever been confirmed that the Tesseract sequence was inspired by 2001's ending, but it seems highly likely. The biggest reason the ending isn't out of place, though, is because of how it perfectly wraps up all the themes that have been established throughout the story. I've always described Interstellar as a love letter to humanity. Cooper said it best in the opening act. Humans are meant to be explorers and pioneers. Even though the Earth seemed to be turning on humanity, they still managed to survive through it all. That resilience, that strong will to live, is what sets humans apart. Yet, in this praise of humanity, Interstellar doesn't shy away from the failures of man. In a not-so-subtle way, Dr. Man serves as an allegory for the worst of mankind. Anne Hathaway's character, Amelia, actually hints at this just before going into cryosleep. Right after talking about Dr. Man, she coincidentally mentions how she doesn't believe nature is evil. The only evil they'll encounter is what they bring with them. And that truly did end up being the case. Yes, what happened on Miller's planet was unfortunate, but there was no malice in those waves. Whereas Dr. Man's betrayal stems from selfishness. A selfishness that motivates him to murder. It's the evil of humanity in its purest form. Even in this future where mankind has begun to explore new galaxies, they still find a way to fight and betray one another. Ironically though, just before man betrays Cooper, he explains why he's going to leave. Man's will to live extends only to himself. He claims he's doing this for the sake of the mission. If that were the case, he would have told them the truth just after he woke up. His real motivation is simply the desire to extend his own life by any means necessary. On the other hand, Cooper's will to live extends to his children through the love he has for them, a love that extends beyond the reaches of time and space. This love has motivated his every action since the beginning of this story, and in this instance, it saves his life. And this whole sequence with man shows where the perseverance of mankind comes from. In man's selfishness, he not only accidentally ends his own life, but also puts the entirety of the human race at risk. Keep in mind, on board the Endurance were the fertilized eggs in case Plan A failed, and man knew this when he attempted to die. On the other hand, Cooper's selflessness, motivated by his love for his children, encourages him to do what is necessary, which leads to another one of the best scenes in the film. The visuals, the stakes, and yet again the music work together to create a scene that is not easily replicated and is profoundly moving. Not to mention the spinning of the Endurance, which was made to resemble a clock, in effect representing last time. And then, of course, the larger implication of the scene being the fact that love is what allows mankind to accomplish the impossible. It is the ultimate motivating force, emanating from some unknown dimension that transcends all that we know, just as Brand mentioned in her speech. Brand's speech on love seems to become more powerful upon each rewatch, and proves to be the basis to this whole ending. She rightly describes love as existing outside of human parameters, like space, time, even gravity. And while this is a profound message, at the time she says this, love appears to be clouding her judgment. After the aforementioned sequence with Amanda, it seems that she may have had a point. And that point is proven when Cooper uses love, this force from a higher dimension, to guide him through the Tesseract. My realization of this theme is what finally made the Tesseract sequence hit home for me. A complaint that has plagued Nolan throughout his career is that he's too logical. Some claim that his films lack that emotional core. That couldn't be further from the truth for Interstellar. Few narratives have resonated with me as deeply as Interstellar's. On several occasions, I found myself nearly brought to tears by the incomprehensibly heartbreaking events taking place. The obvious example is the scene where Cooper watches 23 years worth of messages, slowly realizing just how much of his children's lives he missed. Somehow, even after several rewatches, this scene hasn't lost any integrity, and the editing took a big role. A frequent collaborator with Nolan, Smith, served as editor for Interstellar, and yet again, he did a fantastic job. Each cut of the book focuses largely on Cooper, which is vital in making this moment as impactful as possible. The scene ends with a seamless transition back to Earth as Murph ends the message, reiterating how integral the connection between Cooper and Murph is in the story. And the scene where the two finally reunite always manages to have a tremendous impact. And a big reason for this is because we saw her struggle alongside him. Not only her struggle to survive and to fight for the human race, but also fighting that doubt whether her dad left her there. Seeing Cooper finally fulfill his promise, and most importantly, her overcoming that doubt, is incredible. In a typical Nolan fashion, the ending beyond this is left very open-ended, with Cooper leaving to meet Amelia on Eddie's planet, mankind's promising last hope of survival. Interstellar is a masterpiece. Though critics may not have seen it upon release, this fact has become more and more evident as time has gone on. I think critics fell into the same trap I did upon my first viewing, getting too caught up in the what and not focusing enough on the why. Nolan films always tend to engage the audience's mind. I think that was the mindset both myself and others may have gone into it with initially. But in a way that no project of his had done up to this point, Interstellar requires the viewer's heart in it as well. That's not to say Interstellar isn't mentally engaging. Keeping up with the plot and like theoretical physics stuff still takes effort on the viewer's part, but it's unlikely to combine many aspects of Interstellar and what primarily stuck with viewers long after. The emotional core of Interstellar is what stayed with audiences for years to come. That's why Interstellar seems to become more beloved as time goes on. At least in my experience, it never quite leaves you after that first view. I said it was a love letter to humanity, and I feel that's genuinely the best way to describe it. It fills the audience with this profound pride in their humanity, and not just themselves, but the species as a whole. In spite of our flaws, all that mankind has accomplished is remarkable when we sit and reflect. In our society, cynicism is on the rise, and honestly it has been for the last couple decades. That sentiment is understandable. By this film's philosophy, we are meant to be pioneers and explorers, yet we live in a period of human history where there seems to be nothing left to explore. You and I live in a period of time when we were born too late to explore the Earth, and too early to explore the stars. This was a thought that always bothered me when I was young, and I believe it to be the root cause of much of the cynicism and hopelessness we see in mankind today. We have nothing left to explore, so instead we rot. And while this may seem to be a viable way of life, in reality, we still have reasons to be optimistic. While Interstellar does make me profoundly jealous of the space travel depicted within, as I mentioned at the outset, it's about so much more than that. The core of the story is the relationships between people. Yes, you and I may not be able to travel the cosmos. We can't travel across space and time like the characters in Interstellar, but we do have access to that artifact of a higher dimension as the film describes it. And though it may seem trite, the hope this film provides is simple. It's the transcendent power of love. That love being the key to humanity's future and survival. Nolan describes himself as an optimist, and that is evident in Interstellar. He clearly believes in humanity, has hope for our future. And that simple belief that everything is going to be okay lies at the very core of Interstellar. And perhaps if more people adopted this mindset, it could prove to be the solution to the generational curse of cynicism. Either way, Interstellar has cemented itself as a science fiction classic. It perpetuated the growing popularity of the science fiction genre over the following decade, and it further established Christopher Nolan as the premier filmmaker of his generation. 3 years later, in 2016, 2017, Nolan would follow up Interstellar with another original film titled Dumb, which is by far the movie I see discussed the least in the recent catalog. Why is that? Is it simply unremarkable, or should it be mentioned with the same breath as Nolan's other classics? That's what we'll be finding out next week. If that sounds interesting to you, let me know in the comments, and subscribe for more content like this. Thanks for watching.
There's a reason I trust my shopping list with Shipt. Shoppers with Shipt know that no order is ordered. They come through adding care to my cart. They double check labels, wouldn't confuse me. They know what's right. With Shipt, it's never just delivery. They shop same day, the same way you would.
Shipt member for half off only $49 at shipt.com/offer. Terms apply.
Christopher Nolan appeared to be at a crossroads in his career. Of course, he'd have to find a new production company to finance and distribute his next project. But first,
I'll bring your phone.
You get on a plane with all your
let's get right in.
Behold, Sagittarius A star, 15 million miles wide with a mass of 4 million suns. It's located smack dab at the center of our galaxy. Don't let this picture fool you. The black hole itself is invisible. You're drifting towards this object that's millions of miles wide, and you can never see it. You can only ever see the light swirling around its edge and the space twisting and tearing as it pulls everything. Sagittarius A star is what's known as a supermassive black hole. And supermassives are sort of a fan favorite, but they're really just one of many different types of black hole that exist. Now, we've been covering black holes for decades as a scientist. We publish so much about black holes. So today we've pulled together everything our experts know about these mysterious and terrifying astrophysical objects. Part of the reason why we love black holes and why physicists are so fascinated with them is because that's kind of where all our best theories of physics break. Grasping them, really understanding them, will require us to paper over the cracks of physics that exist today. It will require us to reconcile quantum mechanics and gravity, and it will require us to understand space-time like we've never understood it before. There's also something really mysterious about black holes. How do you detect something you can't really see? Maybe we can hear these invisible objects from like over a billion light years away. And how can an object known for trapping everything suddenly evaporate to nothing? So I hope you join us as we go a bit deeper, because the closer you look, the more unsettling things become. Some black holes were already supermassive when the universe was still in its infancy. Others might be baby black holes left over from the Big Bang, not hiding anywhere, maybe even in our own solar system, and possibly holding the key to dark matter. And once you get to the center of it all, you'll hit two problems that still haunt modern physics: the singularity and the question of what happens to information when it falls into that singularity. Those are the mysteries that we're going to unpack in this video. We'll cover different kinds of black hole, from the ones we've already observed, supermassives, missing links, and more, all the way through to the wacky assortment of things we think could solve our problems with black holes, like wormholes, gravity stars, and these things called fuzzballs. So, let's get started. First things first, the basics. Black holes are simple and serious. Now, each of them can be described with only 3 numbers: a mass, a rotation, and electric charge. And yet they challenge our understanding of the rules of which our cosmos is arranged. There are 3 kinds of black holes for which we have strong observable evidence. There's common variety, your garden variety of black hole, now is known as the stellar mass black hole. Stellar mass black holes are everywhere. There's millions scattered across the galaxy alone. They form when a star no longer possesses enough fuel to generate this outward pressure and instead succumbs to gravity. First in a dramatic supernova explosion and collapsing in and itself. Okay, so hold that thought. This is a good time to ask a few basic questions. Stars what is a black hole? Have you ever seen a diagram like this before? Or have heard Einstein describe space-time like a fabric that stretches and distorts masses placed in it? That warping describes how objects with masses all have a gravitational field. Things that travel close to an object fall towards it, rolling across the natural curve of this fabric. Now, only a few months after Einstein published his equations describing this effect, a guy called Carl Schwarzschild found a pretty alarming result. He said that if you had a mass that was big enough, compacted in a small enough volume, it would cause space-time to diverge and just curve into infinity. We'll call that a singularity. And the curvature and gravitational pull of these regions is so strong that light that gets too close to the surface, known as the event horizon, will just get trapped. As a result, black holes would appear to us as clouds of darkness, like that's why they're called black holes. But they would have these bright, wobbly rings of light around them as light skates across its surface. Now, Einstein was skeptical. To him, this seemed like a mistake. Like, maybe it existed in the mass of general relativity, but we never really see them. But we have actually observed them. Now, if you imagine an invisible household vacuum cleaner, even though you could not see the appliance itself, you'd know it was there because bits of dust would react as a vacuum cleaner approach. This way, beginning in the 1960s, telescopes began to spotting black holes and how stars and gases behaved in the immediate vicinity, seemingly orbiting empty space. Since then, our swiftly developing tools have improved. In the mid-1990s, astronomers began tracking the orbits of several stars circling a source of radio waves. And it turned out it was emitted by our good friend Sagittarius A star. The next big leap in black hole detection came in 2016 when the Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatory, I'm saying that 2 times fast, aka LIGO, witnessed a collision between two black holes. This clash created ripples in space-time. It's precisely the ones predicted by Einstein's theory of general relativity. Fast forward 3 years, and scientists have published a holy grail of sorts, the first ever image of a black hole. In this case, a supermassive. Now, as the name implies, supermassives are like the much larger sibling of stellar masses, and they're not only a little bit larger, they're much, much larger. This brings us on to the monsters living in the middle of our galaxy. Now, a typical stellar mass black hole stretches 30 kilometers wide across its event horizon. That's 15 miles for Americans. As for the Milky Way's resident supermassive Sagittarius A star, try multiplying those numbers by roughly 1 million. The matter contained in black holes is measured in what is known as a solar mass. That's the amount of mass contained in our planet Sun. Now, as the name implies, supermassives are just huge. While the mass of a stellar mass ranges from a few suns worth to up to a few dozen, the largest known example of a supermassive black hole contains the mass of our Sun 66 billion times over. But it's highly compacted. In relative terms, imagine the entire Earth squeezed down to the size of an object 2.5 centimeters across. That's 1 inch. Like stellar mass black holes, we surmise the existence of supermassives long before we ever even saw one. Over half a century ago, scientists identified these things called quasars. They're the brightest known object in the universe. They speculated that the quasars' blinding light was caused by the amount of heat that could only be generated as matter approached the event horizons of these colossal black holes. As matter enters these supermassives, something known as an accretion disk is formed. This concentrated plasma is propelled by the black hole's rotation. Now, the first ever snapshots removed most of our lingering doubt regarding the existence of black holes, and even more spectacularly, earlier this year, the James Webb Telescope even managed to capture the supermassive within our own galaxy, Sagittarius A star. Now, despite their huge size, these giants are surprisingly common, sitting at the center of nearly every Milky Way-sized galaxy. Astrophysicists speculate that the ubiquity of supermasses could be meaningful. Here's why. We have observed a supermassive black hole formed about 13.3 billion years ago, a mere 500 million years after the Big Bang. That presents an appropriately enormous mystery. Based on what we know about how black holes form, how could one get that big that quickly? Perhaps rather than forming from collapsed stars, these early black holes contain the mass of many accumulated smaller objects, clouds, gas. In that case, perhaps there's a connection between supermasses and the formation of galaxies themselves. In the search for answers to that and other questions, scientists have turned their celestial gaze to the next black hole on the core, the so-called missing link. Intermediate black holes most certainly exist. The problem, we haven't been able to find many of them. Many speculate that the formation of these intermediate-sized black holes is tied to dense collections of stars known as globular clusters. The hypothesis goes something like this. A single star expires and forms a stellar mass black hole. This then nudges nearby neighbors to collapse and join the party, and a nascent intermediate black hole is formed. Intermediate black holes contain a solar mass of approximately 1 to 300 suns. Very big compared to the stellar mass black holes, but a drop in the bucket compared to supermasses. And perhaps drops in the bucket are essentially small. Functioning as a sort of galactic food chain, maybe stellar mass black holes combine to form intermediates, thousands if not millions of intermediates that are gobbled up to beget supermassives. Hopefully you're still with me, because this is where our plot begins. Why a mystery? Hey, it's me, the teacher. If you're curious about the universe's biggest mystery, there's no better place to look than New Scientist. Our company was formed in 1956 for all of those interested in scientific discovery and its social consequences. And we love to ask the big picture questions all the time. About the universe, about life, and what it means to be human. If that sounds like something you like too, then why not join us? With a New Scientist digital subscription, you'll get access to all of our award-winning science and technology journalism, some edited by me, including our daily news so you're up to date with the latest developments, and our deep dive features so you're never without a captivating tale to fuel your curiosity. For especially discounted New Scientist digital subscription, go to newscientist.com/YouTube. So, back to that mystery, the primordials. Alright, small, medium, and large black holes definitely exist. We've seen them, but we think there may also be an extra small type of black hole, one that might even be key to resolving the mystery of the elusive dark energy and dark matter. So, so-called primordial black holes could be hiding just about anywhere, maybe even in our own solar system. These baby black holes would have begun forming after the Big Bang. In the universe's earliest days, fluctuations in space-time would have created an uneven distribution in the density of matter throughout the universe. Some lumpy bits in the primitive cosmic soup. In areas of relatively high density, micro black holes whose mass would have been able to be measured in single-digit kilograms may have formed. But as if locating primordial black holes wasn't hard enough, like finding needles in an intergalactic haystack, advanced age further complicates the challenge. Stephen Hawking predicted that black holes emit a type of radiation we call Hawking radiation, and as they do so, they steadily shrink. Like melting ice, the smaller they get, the faster they decrease in size. Given the rate of this evaporation, primordial black holes formed shortly after the Big Bang would have already disappeared. The search is now underway for the telltale gamma rays that would represent this ancient black hole's last breath. But quite a lot is riding on it. Many believe that primordial black holes may prove to be the secret hiding place for dark matter, the elusive and invisible glue that binds our universe. But here we come to a bump in the road. What if our concept of a black hole is flawed? As our investigation deepens, additional doors open to an astonishing array of possibilities. Black holes within black holes, secret passageways to travel throughout time and space, and more. All possible solutions to a pair of very big problems. The problem. Be they ultra small, small, medium, or large, all black holes are major pains for physicists. So what was Einstein's problem with them, and why was he so opposed to the idea that they could exist when he was first pointed out by Schwarzschild? Because black holes, as we describe them in group theory, present two supermassive problems. Each relates to the idea of a singularity, the points of infinite density believed by many to exist in the center of black holes. In theories like general relativity, infinities are a sign that something is badly broken. Einstein, when he first formulated his theory, relied on space-time being made of geometry that just smoothly extends. That's how we make the maths of general relativity and energy conservation work. If it suddenly just veers off into infinity, it's unclear what happens to those other laws. And because of this problem, Einstein attempted, but failed to prove that black holes were possible. And then there is the information paradox. Originally detailed by Stephen Hawking, this paradox pits our understanding of the physical world in the largest sense against our understanding of the world in the smallest. This is where we get the clash of our two best theories of reality, general relativity and quantum mechanics. General relativity holds that information about matter compressed inside a singularity should just be lost. Problem, laws of quantum mechanics state that information cannot be destroyed. In tackling these twin challenges, scientists have attempted to tweak the equations, put forth a radical proposal that what we're actually looking at aren't singularities, but a type of cosmic improvement. They've conjured up blueprints for alternate concepts of black holes in which the maths adds up. This process is known as regularization, and the resulting models are therefore known as regular black holes. But as you're about to see, they are anything but. Pure a trio of cosmic curveballs with quirky names and even quirkier properties. Meet string theory's contribution to the conversation, fuzzballs. One of the main strengths of the fuzzball model is that on paper, it solves both the singularity problem and the information paradox in one fell swoop. How? String theorists think that reality, the particle in the universe, is actually made up of even tinier vibrating strings and membrane-like structures called grains. They think that a black hole could be a dense tangle of these strings and grains, knitted together in a compact object. To a distant observer, a fuzzball might look like a conventional black hole, but up close, the surface of a fuzzball would be like a weird quantum thicket, a strange vibrating structure, constantly absorbing and re-emitting radiation instead of just gobbling it up. The fuzzball sidesteps the information paradox by getting rid of the idea of an event horizon and singularity. Information never really disappears, it just gets entangled and stored in this mess of quantum strings in the black hole's intricate internal structure. The catch? We all, quite fortunately, live outside of black holes, and from an outsider's perspective, there is nothing which